Hello and welcome to the Cardiovascular Health Handout. The handout is organized by bullet point, and each bullet point represents a medical study showing evidence of benefit for said intervention, organized in reversed order in which I read this study, so the earliest bullet points are not necessarily the most important thing to reduce cardiovascular risk, but rather the most recent. Getting started, some patients have some level of frustration despite very healthy habits and being unable to reduce their LDL. And for these patients, I generally direct them to the portfolio diet, which you can Google and institute some of those changes, and we can recheck labs within 3 months of instituting those changes. We know that ginger has many health benefits, including reduction of cholesterol and triglycerides, which reduces cardiovascular risk. Researchers in Sweden used spinach smoothies to reduce LDL cholesterol. Coenzyme Q10 is a very important substance in the body for having a healthy heart, and generally it is achieved through the diet by eating green leafy vegetables, but you can see there some dosing instructions if you prefer to supplement. There's a burgeoning field of study known as chronobiology, the study of when you do things matters, and this is one example of chronobiology at play. Researchers have shown that eating 2 to 3 meals per day is associated with lower cholesterol than just 1 meal per day. Granted, it depends on what you're consuming at those times and when you eat your 1 meal per day, but this is important given the trend of intermittent fasting nowadays. Vitamin B6, pyridoxine is very important for heart health, amongst other things, and can be achieved through consuming yeast, whole grains, legumes, vegetables, etc. In general, I promote a whole food plant-based diet as opposed to supplementing with vitamins. Tofu consumption is very healthy. Most of the soy grown in the U.S. is GMO, but this GMO soy is often fed to cattle and other animals and not given to humans for human consumption. It's always important to check the label whenever you purchase tofu or other soy products. But in addition to reducing cardiovascular risk, tofu consumption is associated with a lower risk of various cancers, including prostate and breast. Getting away from diet for a moment, we know that a daily hot bath is linked with a lower risk of cardiovascular disease. And I often think of cultures such as the Scandinavians or Russians who go from the sauna to the ice bath to the sauna. And what they're doing when they do that is working their blood vessels. The dilation and constriction cycle helps to have healthy vascular system so that it's able to withstand any stresses later on that otherwise may lead to coronary ischemia and a heart attack. Vitamin B9, also known as folic acid or folate, is important for cardiovascular health, and dietary sources include asparagus, bananas, etc. Cilantro has been shown to reduce cholesterol, as has 1 gram or about a teaspoon of cinnamon per day. The body craves regularity, and this can be regular meals, which is associated with lower cholesterol levels. We know that it's important to consume a large breakfast and try to make dinner the smallest meal of the day. Habitual breakfast skippers have higher cholesterol and can drive up their coronary risk. Black cumin, which is different than regular cumin, is shown to reduce cholesterol. And there's the evidence on regular cumin, also heart healthy. Cranberries or unsweetened cranberry juice can do the same thing. Omega-3 fatty acids are important for heart health, and dietary sources include chia, ground flaxseed, hemp seeds, etc. If you prefer to supplement, I've listed dosing instructions here. Chlorella, which is a form of algae, can be taken in supplement form to reduce cholesterol. Walnuts are a healthy source of omega-3s and are known to reduce cardiovascular risk. Same with garlic. And soluble fiber. Fiber is essentially the cellular wall of plant foods. So fiber naturally comes from fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains. I consider fiber or plant food to be like the pipe cleaners for the coronary arteries. So you want to, if nothing else, remember the word fiber from this handout. In the spirit of consuming whole grains, barley's been well studied. This study out of Sweden shows that consuming whole grain barley bread reduces coronary risk. Black beans, and really pretty much any bean, is going to be very heart healthy. Brown rice and other unprocessed rices can be healthy for the heart. Essentially, you want to avoid white foods such as white rice and white potatoes. More evidence on the healthy nature of rice and rice bran and whole grains. Carbohydrates have unfairly been labeled as unhealthy foods recently, and it's important to distinguish whole grains and other complex carbohydrates from the simple carbohydrates and processed foods that do raise cardiovascular risk. For example, broccoli is largely carbohydrate, but so are Twinkies, and one obviously is a very healthy food. More evidence on the health benefits of coenzyme Q10. We've been discussing a lot about which foods to consume more of. It needs to be pointed out that excessive animal protein, regardless of the fat content, can raise cardiovascular risk through other mechanisms. The food that we eat is processed by the gut bacteria that we house in our colons. And regular consumption, for example, of animal proteins leads to the production by these bacteria of such postbiotic products as homocysteine and TMAO. TMAO is also known as trimethylamine N oxide, and if it's present in large quantities, can be implicated in the formation of heart disease. Interestingly, you can find a willing vegan who does not consume any red meat, and if they consume red meat, they do not produce any TMAO because they lack the bacteria that produce this harmful substance. Of course, avoiding these simple carbohydrates found in highly processed foods is good for the heart. It's amazing, but just standing up more changes your metabolism and lowers cholesterol. In this study, standing for an additional 2 hours a day that otherwise would have been spent sitting improves heart health. Riboflavin, also known as vitamin B2, is important for heart health. Dark green leafy vegetables are an important dietary source. Vitamin B3, also known as niacin, is important, as is vitamin C for heart health and blood pressure. Consuming 2 teaspoons of apple cider vinegar or any vinegar with each meal helps with appetite control, weight loss, and heart health. Dark foods contain phytonutrients and anthocyanins that are good for the heart, such as dark chocolate or green tea. A word on intermittent fasting. When done appropriately and not for weight loss as the primary objective, intermittent fasting is very healthy for the heart. Beets would be another example of a richly colored plant food that contains healthy anthocyanins. Same with tomatoes, which also reduce the risk of prostate cancer. Eliminating sugar-sweetened beverages is one of the healthiest moves anybody can make for their health. Sugar can be cardiotoxic just as too much saturated fat can be. The DASH diet, if you're looking for a specific dietary plan, you can Google this. It stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, and although developed specifically to lower a patient's blood pressure, it can also reduce the risk of heart attack. More evidence on standing up more and sitting down less. Fat is necessary for a healthy lifestyle, but it should be obtained from healthy sources, such as olive oil, avocados, walnuts, essentially plant sources. Interesting that besides diet and standing up more and other non-dietary interventions, just having a pet has been shown to reduce the risk of a heart attack, probably because it gives somebody a sense of purpose and some love in their life. Physical activity can be incorporated throughout one's day without needing to join a gym or having a formal exercise regimen. Trying to find ways to stand up more or park the car in the farthest part of the parking lot or just taking the stairs can reduce your heart attack without a lot of extra effort. Blueberries contain a lot of those heart-healthy anthocyanins and are considered a superfood. Just flossing more. We touched a little bit on the gut bacteria that can team with us to create a heart-healthy environment. Well, we also house an oral flora, and maintaining a healthy oral flora is important for cardiovascular health. Onions would be another heart-healthy food to try to incorporate on a regular basis. Sweet potatoes are different than white potatoes. They have a lot of heart-healthy components and are a staple of the Okinawan diet, which is a blue zones diet and one that leads to some of the most long-lived people on the planet. Taking a vacation more, the scientists of Syracuse University were able to study this, and likely this is a stress-related intervention or stress reduction-related intervention that can lead to a lower risk of cardiovascular disease. Sesame seeds have been studied, and regular consumption of an adequate number of sesame seeds can reduce cholesterol and blood pressure. More evidence on the heart benefits of soy foods. Alcohol in moderation, defined as no more than 12 to 24 ounces of beer per day, has been shown to reduce the risk of coronary disease, as has red wine. You should pick one or the other. And finally, coffee has often been implicated in raising blood pressure, but we know that a small amount of coffee per day, again, 12 to 24 ounces, actually reduces the risk of death from heart attacks. It's important, getting back to chronobiology, to limit caloric intake later in the day, and a good rule of thumb would be to consume no calories after 6 or 7 p.m. Metformin is a prescription drug that we use to treat diabetes, but researchers are learning more about the benefits it has for the heart. Patients who take metformin have been shown to have fewer heart attacks. One more word on animal products, and a lot of patients state that they have cut out the red meat and have switched over to chicken and fish, which is probably in general a good move, but sometimes the way that our food is grown or processed or farmed nowadays, it can actually be more fatty than beef. It's injected with a lot of hormones and antibiotics in some of these industrial plants, and it's just not the same type of chicken that we used to grow 100 years ago. So if you're going to consume chicken, I would encourage you to know the source and know how it was made. The U.S. Army did a very interesting study on the timing of meals and found that eating a food at 8 o'clock at night will raise your cholesterol more than eating that exact same food at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'd like to transition now to some resources for further learning. First of all, web-based resources, including videos on Netflix, can be very entertaining and informative. I recommend watching Game Changers or Forks Over Knives as two good examples. For those patients who are interested in learning more about a plant-based diet, I've done this myself, signed up for the 21-day Vegan Kickstart at the website you see listed there. It comes from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and it's free. You will get 21 days of emails, and each day the email will instruct you on what you will be shopping for at the grocery store and what you'll be making for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack. It's a great introduction to how to eat plant-based. My go-to website for nutrition information is Dr. Michael Greger's website, nutritionfacts.org. He has literally hundreds of short 2 to 5 minute videos on every nutrition topic under the sun. If you have questions, this is one of the first places I go. Michael Pollan is not a doctor, but he is an excellent author of many books on nutrition. He also has a Netflix series from 2016 called Cooked, 4 episodes entitled Fire, Earth, Water, and Air, and that is very well done and informative. For the book readers, I recommend The China Study by Dr. Campbell, which is a summation of 50 years of his own research, starting with the National Institutes of Health in the 1960s, and how the evidence he collected along the way in first the Philippines and then China showed him and changed his mind on the benefits of a plant-based diet. I mentioned Dr. Greger's website. He's written a couple of books, How Not to Die, and then his sequel, How Not to Diet, on weight loss. But he neatly organizes his first book, How Not to Die, into 15 chapters, and chapter 1 is How Not to Die from Heart Disease. So you could just read that one chapter or any of the listed chapters there that interest you. Dr. Dean Ornish is the grandfather of the plant-based movement. He came to fame back in about 1990, having published a study on patients who had survived their first heart attack, and he was able to show regression of their coronary plaques through diet alone, which was revolutionary at the time, and still the only study to ever show what type of a diet can reverse cholesterol plaques. And until another diet is shown to do the same thing, I think this should be our default diet, which would be a whole food plant-based diet. Undo It is his sequel to The Spectrum. It came out in 2019, and if you're looking for a primer on what that book is all about, Undo It, it being heart disease, you can watch the YouTube interview he had with Oprah Winfrey, and I think you'd get a lot out of that book. It's more than just diet. He talks about the 5 pillars of health, which are diet, exercise, sleep, stress reduction, and having strong social or spiritual interactions. The Good Gut is an informative and entertaining look at the 100 trillion bacteria in our guts that influence our health. The blue zones are the 5 areas of the world where people often live long, happy, healthy lives into their hundreds. And the 5 blue zones are studied by Dan Buettner, and he writes about what these populations do to achieve longevity. Dr. Longo at the USC Center for Longevity writes about how to live to accomplish the same thing that Dan Buettner talks about in the blue zones. And then getting back to Michael Pollan, who has written many interesting books and has a way of putting hard science into layman's terms, and these are easily digestible books. Finally, for those who prefer to learn from podcasts or watching YouTube, here is a starter set of interviews. Rich Roll has a great podcast. He interviews Dr. Joel Kahn from 2018. And then he also interviews Dr. Dean Ornish later in 2018. Those would be 2 prominent lifestyle medicine doctors that I would recommend watching or listening to. Dr. Michael Greger's weekly podcast called Nutrition Facts is very informative. And finally, I recommend listening to Rich Roll's interview with Dr. Gemma Newman from 2019. I appreciate you listening and watching this far. I'm always available for office visits, or you can send me messages or questions through the portal, and I would love to continue this conversation offline. Best of luck to you, and take care.